everyone. Welcome back to A Girl, a Guy, and a Buffy podcast. I'm Kate, one of your co-hosts.
And I'm Charles.
So yeah, welcome to the second part of our finale for our season one. Last time that we talked about misogyny in the show, in the Buffyverse. And this time we're going to be talking about rape culture. So we do want to just give a content warning that we will be talking about rape and sexual assault and sexual harassment and power dynamics. If that is a topic that you're just not able to listen to right now, please, we completely understand. Do whatever you need to for your own emotional and mental health. We will also put some resources in the show notes for mental health and sexual assault organizations and services that are available for anyone who may need those. So please definitely take care of yourselves. That comes first for us.
Our Buffy the Vampire Slayer podcast, and it is a spoiler-filled podcast, and we're talking about the entire series as a whole and looking at it through the lens of this season's big bad, which is feminism, and asking questions like, is it a feminist show? Was the sex in the show empowering? We've talked about, the misogyny on the show. Was it purposeful? Was it, unintentional? And now we're leading up to the biggest bad of all.
Yeah, so to kick off the discussion for this episode, we're going to do a little bit of what we did in the last episode, give some definitions so that we're level setting about what we're talking about on this topic. So to give a little bit of definition about what is rape culture, the first definition comes from a website called domesticshelters.org. And they say, according to Marshall University's Women's and Gender Center, rape culture is an environment in which rape is prevalent and in which sexual violence against women is normalized and excused in the media and popular culture. Rape culture is perpetuated through the use of misogynistic language, the objectification of women's bodies, and the glamorization of sexual violence, thereby creating a society that disregards women's rights and safety. And then also pulling a definition from Vox.
So the one from Vox says, rape culture is a culture in which sexual violence is treated as the norm and victims are blamed for their own assaults. It's not just about sexual violence itself, but about cultural norms and institutions that protect rapists, promote impunity, shame victims, and demand that women make unreasonable sacrifices to avoid sexual assault. And although rape culture has its roots in long-standing patriarchal power structures that were designed to benefit men, today's rape culture burdens men too. For instance, by ignoring the fact that men can be victims of rape and sexual assault, and women can be perpetrators of it. That means that male victims are also left without legal protection and social support.
Summing that up, essentially, rape culture is the fact that the culture and society allows rape to be permissible, and it's throughout all of our culture, our pop culture, our daily lives. It's expecting women to take precautions to protect themselves while out on the street at night versus teaching people not to sexually assault other people. So much throughout a lot of early pop culture, particularly television, rape was always a stranger comes in, that's a lot of what like Law and Order SVU perpetrates.
Right.
And obviously that happens. There are certainly cases, but as we find out more and more, particularly today, a majority of rape and sexual assault is by someone
Right.
I think we have such issues with communication and consent in our culture that we don't talk about that stuff. So, you can see why it leads to rapes and sexual assaults when you're not having the right conversations, when you're not teaching kids from an early age what consent is, what agency is. No, and that no means no. You do unfortunately have this as part of your society and your culture.
And it's one of those things too that even when you're in a relationship, and I think that's a fallacy too, that you can be those rapes and sexual assaults can happen even with your partner. And there's a lot of intimate partner violence that happens throughout our country, and it's astonishing the amount of people who've experienced that, both men and women.
Absolutely. I mean, sadly, for the longest time, and I don't have the date on this when this changed, but marital rape wasn't legally possible in this country. If a husband forced sex on his wife, that was just them having sex. Like there was literally no law. There was nobody a woman could turn to. You could not turn to the police because it was not illegal.
Actually, looking that up again, it's marital or spousal rape is illegal in every state, but it's only been this way since 1993,
Oh,
actually.
wow.
And until,
It's even worse.
yeah, there were exemption laws, I think, that
Gotcha.
started to form
Sure.
in the 70s, but it became illegal across the board in 1993. And
Yeah.
that's from a criminal defense lawyer's website.
And of course, we're just talking about the US. I
Right.
mean, sadly, in other places in the world, it's still that situation, or I mean, we still certainly have victim blaming in this culture, in this country, but there are certainly other cultures in other countries where it's even worse.
That is for sure. We are going to give some examples of it, and I think we need to break this down into there are two kinds of sexual assaults or rape assaults that happen on Buffy. One is the actual kind that we experience every day and that happens to us. And then there is also the kind that is mystical in nature. And there's a lot of consent that happens, a lot of things that happen mystically that don't allow people to consent to what's going on. And so we're going to break it down into those ways and how it's used, using it for humorous situations, which is an example of that is Giles and Joyce and Band Candy, Buffy and Spike in Something Blue, Buffy and Riley and Where the Wild Things Are, Jonathan and the Twins and Superstar, Buffy and RJ and him, Xander and the Potentials and his fantasy during Dirty Girls.
So yeah, in those cases, while we do have obviously drugs in our world that can impact people's agency and consent, in this case, all of the ways these happen could only happen in the show, but it doesn't take away from the fact that there's still questionable, still issues of consent, and yet they're played for a lot more of a laugh, and they're not examined for the fact that they have issues of consent and where do they fall on, the potentially fall on the sexual assault spectrum. So moving into out and out sexual harassment and assault examples, you've got Buffy and Xander in the pack. You've got Reptile Boy. Those fraternity boys are certainly practice predatory behavior towards the high school girls. Uh, Larry slapping a girl's ass in the episode Phrases. You've got Buffy and the swimmer who tries to sexually assault her and Go Fish. Angel and Buffy's relationship, which is under the age of consent for California. When they had sex, she was 17 at that time, and currently the age of consent in California is 18. You have Angelus and the maid Margaret, who he rapes in the episode Amends in the flashback. You have Faith raping Buffy and Riley when she takes over Buffy's body and has sex with Riley as Buffy. Willow using magic on Tara to forget their fight, and then they have sex. Warren's attempted rape of Katrina, and then Spike's attempted rape of Buffy.
And all of those are real life examples, and all of those things are things that could happen
Yeah.
to any one of us as well. So
Yes.
some of the other violations that happen, there's slut language used throughout, especially by female characters. Bewitched, bothered, and bewildered, where Xander casts a spell and then all of a sudden all of the girls are in love with him. That is, that's a form of manipulation right there. Giles hypnotizing Buffy and then drugging her uh, for the test, and that's, that is, I mean, that's a huge violation of trust there. That's in Helpless. Riley asking Buffy to date him while he's her TA. There's definitely a power dynamic that happens there. That's not okay. You shouldn't be dating your TAs. The person who's grading your papers. Maggie watching Riley and Buffy have sex, the IN team. Um, the Buffy bot, which is hugely problem. I mean, Spike asking Warren to build the Buffy bot and so that he can have sex with it. Season 6 as trauma porn. I think that kind of goes without saying. There's so much that happens in season 6, especially between Buffy and Spike and the stuff with Warren uh, and Katrina and all of that stuff.
And then Willow and Tara as
And
well.
Willow and Tara, yeah, as well. So there's a lot of traumatized issues that are happening there. And yeah, Amy and Willow and the Bronze, yeah, where Amy forces a girl to flirt with Willow when they are, when they change the boys and put them into the cages to make them go-go dancers and things like that, manipulating the world to make it to their liking. Xander telling Dawn about Spike trying to rape Buffy, which is not his place to say. He takes away Buffy's agency and Dawn's innocence and doesn't allow Buffy to tell her own story. It's not his story to tell. It was done out of spite, not out of any sort of caring. Buffy never has the opportunity to deal with any of the sexual assaults or any of her assaults, but there's time to focus on what a monster is. During season 6 and 7, there's a lot of focus on her and how she's, how she feels like she's a terrible person and all the things that she has done wrong, but she doesn't get to deal with the things that have been done to her. How the first Slayer is made and get it done, I mean, that just seeing that and the idea of like her getting chained down and them putting something into her without her consent. They just take a girl and change her life forever without asking her. And Faith's implied backstory and how she believes sex is all she has to offer.
Yeah, so that's a long list.
That's a lot.
It's a lot. The two of us have pre-meet to discuss our episodes, and we were doing this one, and it was overwhelming. For as much as we love this show, it is pervasive with elements of rape culture. It's one thing to realistically show what women go through or men in this case too, because we have the example with Riley. It doesn't always feel like it's, when you look at it holistically, that all of that needed to happen in order to move the stories or the characters forward. It starts to feel, I can't think of the word for it.
Gratuitous.
Thank you. Gratuitous. That is the word I was looking for.
When you were talking, that's the word that popped into my head.
Yes.
And did all of that stuff need to happen? I mean, there are great stories for sure. And I think it just goes to show how much rape culture exists in our world. And that since it is such a reflection of everything. And if the show is a reflection of, that high school is hell and that idea of reflecting all of that, so there are young women being sexually harassed and raped in high school and by their classmates, by teachers. And so when we're looking at stuff like Go Fish, which we talked about the last episode, when he throws Buffy into the water at the end, it's not just about the guy who tried to, cop a feel with her in the car. The coach then quote unquote pimps her out to the boys because it's not about them feeding on her, it's about them raping her.
Right. It's about fulfilling their sexual needs, quote unquote.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think the thing about all of this is that, and I would say, at least for myself, I can't speak for anyone else, but this is an area that I think has changed. My perspective has changed on this as we learn and we understand more about the importance of representation and the importance of people who experience whatever the different stories are telling their own story.
Hmm.
And so I think that's, even though I know there are a lot of women writers on this show, I don't know what obviously their life experiences are. So I don't know if they themselves have ever been sexually asked, sexually assaulted, been raped. But so that may be the case. They may be telling some of their own stories through these episodes, but I do feel like it's used much more in a give a dramatic moment, give a dramatic storyline, or like the first set of examples we gave, play it for the laugh. And that perpetuates the rape culture. It is not a purposeful telling of someone's story in order to show what someone may have gone through
Yeah,
and told from that person's perspective.
right.
Um,
Right. And you mentioned Law and Order previously, and
yeah.
I know we're talking about Buffy, but I am going to sort of move around because I think what Law and Order does, because it is a show that deals specifically with sexual assault and rape victims and things like that. And when that show started, and I have watched all 24 seasons, I have watched every episode, all of the seasons, but what happens is that there's a shift that occurs during the seasons. It's very much starts off as trauma porn. It's very much like gratuitous, and it's very graphic and all of that stuff. And then at some point, about 10 seasons in, it sort of shifts, and the shift goes from this, sort of aggressive male thing to it becomes more about the victims in the SVU, and and it becomes more about their journey and how they can heal and the importance of believing victims, and it becomes much more of a restorative show, and it talks about
Mhm. Oh no, I would absolutely agree. An example I keep hearing about from critics that respect in TV and um that talk about I May Destroy You. I don't know if you've watched that.
I
Yeah, so that's an
have
example that keeps being held up as a much more realistic, told from the perspective of the person who experienced it.
yes.
And done in not a, oh, we just want to traumatize and give them a juicy backstory sort of way.
Right. And it's funny that you said that, because yes, I May Destroy You is a great, I because I wrote my final paper, and I used that as one of my examples when I was finishing my graduate work. And that show kept coming up in my research too. And so I was like, I need to watch it. I need to see what's going on here. And
Yeah.
it is such a good show. And if you haven't seen it, please go watch it, because it really, really is a great show. And I don't want to spoil too much, but it is about a woman who was sexually assaulted. And the thing is that the show is that's kind of the backstory
Mm,
that's happening. It's about her journey with that, and that's her own personal story too. Like she wrote the show because she had this experience happen to her. But what happens is we get to see how she's living her life with this living with the assault. And so it's really well done. It doesn't victim blame, it doesn't shame the person for doing it, and it also shows examples of how men are also sexually assaulted, especially queer men, who, when you talk about the number of men who get sexually assaulted, that number is significantly smaller than women. But then when you look at the number of queer men who have been sexually assaulted, that number goes up to like 83%.
yeah. Yeah. Well, and I remember one of the things the critics saying about that show as well is that, as you said, it's not all about the sexual assault, but that also she's a whole person. Because
Hmm.
sometimes she's a terrible person, like not a good person.
Yeah,
She's a real person going through the world as a real person.
right. She's not this fragile thing that's going to
Yes.
break
Right.
because of this incident. She has to
Right.
keep going. And I think Buffy does the same thing.
Yeah.
She has to keep going through all of it and has to keep saving the world even though she's being traumatized because this thing happened, because
Yeah.
all of the time. However, not once does she go to a therapist, and she doesn't even process with her friends a lot of this information. And it's
Yeah.
part of the reason why Riley left was
Yeah.
that she shut him out. Um,
Yeah. Well, I think, you could make an argument early on. I mean, I think that's partly how Buffy reacts to trauma. And then the other fact of it is you don't have anyone in her life who she feels she's safe enough around to push her to open back up, to
mhm,
not shut down show, and probably a flaw in the creator's thinking.
mhm,
I also think how we think about that stuff has changed. I don't think
absolutely.
that would be acceptable if Buffy was created today. Like the fact that she doesn't deal with mental health, that she doesn't have a real adult in her life who's always there to help her with that side of things. Like I
Hmm.
do think, for me anyway, again, this is my perspective. I'm very lucky. I have two great parents who I'm like super close with. I mean, as adults we become friends, but they're also, still my parents in a way. And so to me, not having anyone like that, at least one person in your life
Hmm.
who you can open up to, who can support you, which I feel like Giles is for a while. And then, again, it's not the actor's fault that he wanted to go back to England and be with his family, but the fact that Anthony Stewart had decided to do that, that's fine. But the decision they make for while Giles leaves and when Giles leaves, leaving Buffy like at her lowest point in her mental health, her most vulnerable, when she's like struggling the most with life, where, to be honest, as a Slayer, when did she have time to like learn life stuff?
Hmm.
She was like literally saving the world all the time.
Right,
There was no time to like take a class and learn how to do her checkbook, or, what
right.
does it mean to like get insurance, or, you kind of learn that as you go along, and she doesn't have that kind of life. So
You
the
know,
fact that he like abandons her, like this, you can obviously tell. I'm getting off topic, but I'm ranting about it because it's such a thing that drives me insane about this show, and it drives me more insane the older I get.
which is fair, and it's a fair point too. I disagree. And as you were talking about that, two things came to my head, two things that we've missed,
Yeah.
that I can't believe that we missed. One, another example of rape uh, is Willow resurrecting Buffy.
Yeah. Well, it's one of
Willow
those
just
other
Yeah,
violations for sure.
yeah,
That's a good
other
point.
violation, like Willow just making the
Duh.
choice for everyone else
Hmm.
to bring Buffy back, which is a huge violation because she was in heaven and she never asked for it, and that's why
Yeah.
she's miserable now, and that becomes the trauma for season 6 and going into 7.
Yeah.
Also, I redact my statement. She does talk to a therapist one time in conversations with dead people. Again, played for humor, but she does get to sort of talk about some of that stuff.
No, actually, that's not true. The first time she really does it is the beginning of season 3, and she has to go to the in Beauty and the Beast, and she has to go to the school
Right.
counselor. I
That's
loved
right.
that. To me, that was actually, when I rewatched the show recently, that was literally some of my favorite scenes in that early season 3. And
Hmm.
I'm so sad they killed off his character so
Right.
quickly. Like, I would have loved if she had gotten to go to him for several episodes and started to work through her
Hmm.
emotions and through that trauma. I just think it would have been like phenomenal. But, they played it a different way, as you kind of expected the show back then. But it
Right.
makes me sad because I thought they had such a great dynamic, and
Hmm.
it just, to me, portrayed, going to counseling in such a really like wonderful way.
Right. I mean, and there was so much, yeah, because there is so much. She had to kill her boyfriend and
Who went evil and like killed people, and
after they slept together. Come on.
yeah.
Like that's
And
if that's
and
not
her
trauma.
I know, and her mom doesn't know anything about that's going on in her life. So it's not like she can
Right.
go to her mom.
Right.
And, I think that, again, that's one of the best moments between Giles and Buffy, when he picks her up after stopping, was it after, yeah, the stopping the judge at the
The
mall.
judge.
And he drives her home and he was like, I'm not here to blame you, Buffy. I'm just here to like support you. And it's
Hmm.
such a beautiful moment. That's exactly what she needed. It was the exact right thing to say. I was like, why didn't we get more of that?
Yeah. And I mean, she has a support system. I mean, and there are
Yeah.
moments where, you know, where Willow will say something lovely and helpful, and
Yeah.
and even Xander has his moments, because I was just watching I Was Made to Love You,
Hmm.
and
With
and it's
April.
yeah, with April, and it's after she's just found out that Spike's in love with her, and she's all freaked out about it, and she's like, beaten up on Fluffy Xander, and she's just like, what's wrong with me? Like, what did I
Yeah.
do? Why, again, blaming herself
Yeah.
for the actions of a man who is obsessed with her. And her first thought is, what did I do wrong?
Right.
What about me makes him this way? And Xander's like, it's not your fault.
Yeah.
And it has nothing to do with you. And one day she's like, well, how do I change myself? And how do I do this? And he says to her that it's not, that you don't have to change yourself. And someday someone's going to look at you and see you for
Yeah.
who you are and love you no matter what.
Yeah.
Um, which is probably one of the best things that Xander has
I
ever
agree.
said.
I agree. Now that you're saying that, I remember that, and I made note in my notes when I was watching, and that was really a great moment. And I guess part of that is what happens, and I'm sure that's also realistic in some ways, as particularly in their world where they keep, as they go on, they experience more trauma and more, hardships in their life. As that happens, as you get older, you kind of, almost go more into your own world. So we
Hmm.
can understand why that happens with the friends. It doesn't upset me so much with the friends. It's more that having that adult in her life. So first you take away her mom, which
Hmm.
I just felt like in season 5 is where they were finally like, I felt like there was a much stronger relationship developing between Buffy and her mom, because we actually had Joyce in the show more often.
Right.
And then you take that away from her, and then the fact that, like, and I get it, Giles has his own trauma that he's dealing with in Buffy's death, but at the same time, it doesn't mean he's right to leave, and to leave her, taking away that support system,
Right.
that her friends just don't have the capability at the moment. They're also all figuring out their lives. It doesn't mean they can't rely on each other, but
Right.
you do need sometimes that older person for whatever the needs are, whether it's, financial, mental, emotional support.
Right. And I think that's why conversations with dead people, that exchange that she has with him works so well, because it is someone that she doesn't know. It is a stranger. And he says, like, sometimes it's just easier to talk to a stranger about this.
Yeah.
And she gets pretty intimate with him
Yeah.
about her relationships with Angel and Spike and what's going on in her life. And I
Yeah.
think it's nice for her to see her get sort of an emotional release and get some perspective on what's happening in her life, especially in that moment in time. Like, we're nearing the end of the season. It's like, come on, let's take a look at the series. Let's take a look back and look at all the stuff that you've gone through
Yeah.
and deal with some of it. At least
Yeah.
start dealing with some of it.
Yeah.
And I think, it's important as a creative to go in there with that intention in mind, and to be
Hmm.
mindful of those things as you're creating things. And that's probably, like you said, that's probably not something that they were really doing, because the mission of it was not about, let's protect people's mental health and all
Yeah.
of this stuff. It was, let's create a show about a girl who fights vampires.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I mean, as we know from multiple interviews, and for anyone who has the DVDs and has watched the commentary, Joss Whedon has clearly laid out that, like, his drive was the emotional aspect, the emotional story, the emotional pain. Uh which the first time around seemed like you're like, yes, but now taking a look back, sometimes you're like, maybe that shouldn't have been the only factor. It
right.
certainly made for like some incredible storytelling performances,
Hmm.
but and some of these aspects, looking over it, the show certainly perpetuated rape culture,
Right.
and not always to a beneficial storytelling purpose.
Right. For example, and I will say, for example, Buffy and Spike's relationship,
Yeah, I was
which
gonna say
is,
we have to discuss the elephant in the room. We
yeah,
haven't
I mean, that
fully taken that on right now yet.
I'm just gonna dive right into that one.
Go for it.
I mean, their relationship is, well, it's interesting that people ship the relationship so much, and it's great. And the actors have really great chemistry together,
Yeah.
and it's wonderful to watch them on screen together, for sure,
Yes.
for sure. But looking at it from this perspective and talking about it, it is probably arguably her most unhealthy relationship,
Oh,
because
100%.
that is her relationship with Spike is all based on escapism. It's all based on violence. It's all based on, you know,
It's
and
based on
again,
self-punishment
yeah, self-punishment,
for
and
her.
right. And it has nothing to do, she uses him. He is not using her because he's in love with her, and so he's getting fulfillment from that. So she's manipulating him in that way, and she even says that she's using him.
Yeah. I would argue I don't even think he's getting fulfillment from it. And he's using her in a way because he keeps pushing her and manipulating her and being dark with her because I think he knows it's not real. Like, so he thinks he has to play mind games with her and make her feel low in order to keep her. So it's messed up as well. Like I don't think it's good
Yeah,
for him either. It's not, who wants to be in that kind of relationship? You know, I think that's his like his emotional vulnerability mixed with the demon mentality, and that's where like he doesn't have a healthy mentality, let me put it that way. You know, because I think I can't remember if I said this on a previous episode or just in you and I in conversation, but in rewatching season 6, in my head, since it had been so long, I thought there were like more moments of tenderness between them, but
hmm,
not at all. I mean, they're like literally physically throwing themselves. It's like they're fighting through sex in
yes,
addition to physically fighting. Like there is nothing good or healthy in their relationship.
right. And this is not to kink shame anybody,
No, not at
or to do
all.
anything about, because there is a difference between, S&M and BDSM, and the
A hundred
consent of
percent.
that versus what Buffy and Spike are doing, which is hate sex, basically.
Yes.
She hates, and it's like she hates herself,
Yep.
and she doesn't really like him. So it's, you know, and I think he enjoys the pain. I think he enjoys
Yeah.
sort of the punishment aspect of it. And
Well, I think that's all
and
he
he
knows,
yeah.
you know,
And
with Drusilla
and so
and
he
Angelus and Darla. I mean,
right.
that's what they taught him to be.
Yeah. So he's enjoying this part of it, and it allows him to be close to someone that he cares about.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
despite the fact that it is maybe not the way that he wants it, but it's the way that he knows it to
Yeah.
be, and so it's okay for him. I mean, at least I think, and it's
In
not
his
healthy.
thinking, I would
And his
agree.
thinking, yeah, in his thinking.
Absolutely. I totally agree.
But from an outsider's perspective, it's absolutely toxic for
Yeah.
sure.
Well, and their relationship also, excuse me, their relationship also shows how sex can really screw things up because before they kissed at
Hmm,
the end of Once More with Feeling, they had some lovely moments.
hmm,
Like she could be around him. He was quiet. Like he got what it was like. He's the only person or being she knew in her immediate circle who had also had to claw their way out of their grave.
right,
You know, so I think if they had never done that, would, you know, their relationship during season 6 obviously would have been very different. But
right.
crossing that line for all the wrong reasons,
Hmm,
just, I mean, they, it was inevitable that that was going to be that toxic of a relationship, I
yeah,
think. And the fact that he could hit her, that the chip didn't work on her.
right.
That's the other element that changed the situation.
Hmm,
If that wasn't there, that also might have um, tempered the relationship. I still think it would have been hate sex, at least on Buffy's part, for sure.
right.
She was not in a state to be in a sexual or romantic relationship, especially with Spike, who she only saw as basically a, serial killer in prison with the chip.
Right. And I wonder too, and I wonder too how much, I mean, probably for him, the fact that he could hurt her made it even more like amped up the
Yeah,
sexual tension and like made
the
it hotter for
excitement.
him to be
Yeah.
like, yeah, I can hurt her and she can hurt me and you know,
Yes.
and that's we can be equals in that and we can knock down a building and while we're having sex and wake up in the rubble the next day. It's just a fascinating thing, and I think that the seeing red is kind of the ultimate conclusion to it, and I think it sort of leads to like that's the only place that it could have gone.
Yeah, which I think the has been said from behind, the either Joss or Marty Noxon have certainly said that that was sort of what they saw. This is what we created, and the only way this could end was this way. And I would agree. That certainly seems the most obvious conclusion to their relationship
Hmm.
with the way it went in season 6.
Yeah.
That being said, I didn't have this thought until I was actually prepping for this episode and it sort of hit me. And this goes back to who's doing the storytelling.
Hmm.
And I feel weird to say this because in some ways I think a lot of it comes down to how James Marsters played it. But Spike getting his soul and how that plays out in season 7 is really magnificent to watch, and
Hmm.
to watch him become a champion, because I do think over time, like, he was changing. And I think
Yes.
he's in the Buffyverse, I think he's an anomaly. Like, we certainly, if Angelus got chipped, he would not do what Spike did.
Right.
Nor would Darla. I mean, they would have either immediately tried to figure out somebody to deactivate it or get it out, or they would have used minions to, go after the initiative or whatever. But like, that's just not where the Spike's thinking went. I mean, part of that is probably artificially created so that he could be on the show, and
Hmm.
he was kind of like, the a foil for Buffy and an annoyance for Buffy, and taking some of that Cordelia role along with Anya,
Hmm.
fulfilling that truthsayer who you don't want to hear from because they're too truthful.
Right.
And so it's amazing to watch. But that being said, I realized that Spike's attempted rape of Buffy is about his story. It's about what he does to go for that soul, that they felt the only way Spike would make that change is if he hurt Buffy, and based on how their relationship went and how he thought of her, the only way he could hurt her is to sexually assault her. It's not about Buffy. It's not about her story. It's using
Mm.
her assault to tell a man's story. And that is, to
Mm.
me, a really good example of like rape
Wow.
culture.
Wow. That's a great point.
I mean, I'm sure there are people out there yelling at us going, duh, I saw that, from when it first happened. But for whatever reason, it just like never hit me until now, until prepping for this episode and doing my research and thinking about it. And I was like, yeah, I don't think that's a good thing. I mean, I really like that Spike went to get his soul. I just don't know that that was the right thing to do, the way to get there, and to
Right.
use that assault on Buffy for his story.
Right.
And then also, maybe if they had done the other side of it, they had focused more on Buffy's healing and Buffy dealing with how things went in their relationship,
Hmm.
and they were sort of equally given time to deal with what went on. My opinion might change, but I very much feel like this was like, we need to get Spike to this point. How are we going to do it? Oh yeah, let's have him rape Buffy. Sure.
Right.
I mean, not that they were callous that way, but I just, yeah.
Yeah. And it's interesting too that even the fact that the creators and like and us saying like or me saying that felt like the natural conclusion of this relationship is he that he rapes her or that he tries to rape her is in of itself sort of a pervasive thought of like
Yes.
why is that
Yes.
the only place that it has to go.
No, it's
There are
true.
other options. There really are other options. Why does that have to be the and even when I said it I was like wait, as soon as I said it I went but why? Why does
Yeah,
that have to be the choice that gets made for that reason? It doesn't. There are other ways.
yeah.
So it's not the like rape is not the answer.
No, rape is not the answer. And I think what exacerbates the situation to me and makes it worse is the way they played it after he left her house and was freaking out and talking to Clem in the crypt. You get the implication that he is going to get the chip out
Right.
and end this once and for all.
Hmm.
And I think that cheapens it so much. I really wish they hadn't done that.
Mm.
Like they not that they could have out and out said he was going for the soul, but I don't think they had to imply he was like going out like to get the chip and now really released like the demon inside him. It just
Right.
felt it cheapened what happened and his reaction to it and why he had to go and change and do something about it.
Right.
Does, does that make sense?
Yeah, because the idea is that he didn't get to hurt her. And so then when he goes back, he's like, no, I really do want to hurt her. It makes it sound like
Right.
he wants to hurt her, as opposed
Yes.
to I did something that hurt her,
And that I never thought I would do to her.
and that I didn't, that I don't think that he intended to,
No.
did, and then
Yep.
realized, oh, fuck, I messed up. Damn it. And then the hurt on
Yeah.
her, like, and then it's like, I have to do, like, I can't be this person.
Right.
I can't be this person. Um, and yes, you heard me correctly, people. I think that Spike did not intend to rape Buffy. I think he probably would have had she not stopped him, given their past history and how they engaged with sex and how they started any sex act with violence,
Yeah. And with her saying no.
and with her saying no and then giving into it, that pattern, she was just continuing the pattern that they had already established.
Yep. I agree.
And then when she, when she falls against the tub and he keeps going and she's like, stop, 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 he doesn't realize that that's no longer part of the game.
Yeah.
And so I think he would have done it and it would have been an act of rape. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And again, like we've said, their relationship is not okay. Their relationship is toxic and it's harmful. And that's why it's harmful. It's
Right.
because those lines are so blurred and it's the potential for harm is so great.
Yes.
It's drastically increased when you're in a relationship when it's based on violence and sex.
Yeah.
Just just saying, want to be clear about all of that.
Yeah. There
Um,
was nothing good. There was nothing healthy. That is not an example anyone should live by.
right. I don't want angry emails
Yeah.
being like, what are you
Yeah, no,
talking
I
about?
mean, but you can also understand why well, people are still discussing it today while it still has such a visceral reaction to it. And why, people won't go back and watch that part of the episode, if not the
Hmm.
whole episode. I mean, it is horrifying to watch the way it's
Hmm.
shot, the way Buffy feels vulnerable in a way I don't think she's ever felt before.
Yeah,
And she feels that, we feel that. Spike realizes that when she finally gets through to him and stops him. Yeah,
it's
it's
heartbreaking,
it's
really.
heartbreaking. That's a great description. And then, you know, to the point I made before, it feels like it's to tell a man's story.
Hmm.
I just that adds to the horror of it. To
Yeah.
me, for me anyway.
I mean, I love that point, and I don't think I ever looked at it from that perspective either. And I think it's a great way to examine that and to look at it. And again, how just another reason, another way that the patriarchy and all of that like
Yeah,
takes a woman's pain and makes it about themselves
right.
and carries that. And then I get to then I get to be the hero, the redemptive story and carry on and it's okay because I'm different now and I'm changing.
Right.
Um, which everyone has the right you know, to be redeemed, I think. I think
I would
everyone have,
agree.
you
I
know,
mean, that's a little bit of a, not that we haven't gone inside directions in this episode, probably for another topic, but just to kind of quickly agree, I'm not one of those people who, in this case, doesn't think Spike couldn't receive redemption,
Hmm.
whether or not there's any sort of romantic relationship between him and Buffy going forward. And again, that's also, probably for another discussion. I do think you should give the opportunity for people to redeem themselves, for
Right.
forgiveness, which I actually think the show very much has always been about. That
Yeah.
to me is never, that has been a core component of the show. And I think a core component of who Buffy is.
Right.
In some ways, she wouldn't have people around her if she
Hmm.
didn't forgive them.
Right.
Um,
Now, granted, most of us do not have to see the person who attempted to rape us
yeah,
every day. And
yeah,
so, and when I say redeeming, I mean like in a real life situation, that doesn't mean you have to like forgive that person and then be besties with them or anything like that. It's just,
absolutely.
but because of story and because, we're contained in this little box or whatever, and he's
Yeah.
still around, they still have to deal with each other. So, um, and I think they get to an interesting place. I mean, we could do a whole episode on just Buffy and Spike's relationship
Oh,
as it,
absolutely.
as it is. But
Oh, and then, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, go for it. Go for it.
Well, no, I was just going to say, there's a second elephant we need to discuss that does not get discussed enough.
I was literally
Um,
about to make that
oh,
transition.
sweet. We're on the same page. See, this is why we've been friends for so long.
I was like,
And so yeah, so the big one to discuss that, draws a lot of controversy in the Buffyverse and amongst Buffy fans is Spike's attempted rape of Buffy. But the other one that we never discuss is what Faith does to Buffy and Riley.
yes.
And again, like we said, it's a weird situation because it couldn't happen in our real life, but within the context of the show and in the context of consent and, manipulation, I personally think Faith, by taking Buffy's body to have sex with Riley when neither knows what she's doing, that
Hmm.
is rape.
Yeah, absolutely.
It may not fit the legal definition, but to me, it fits the ethical, moral definition,
For sure. For
you know?
sure. Um, and that's kind of, I mean, honestly, that's kind of her MO,
Yeah.
with Riley, with Xander, with,
Yeah.
it's kind of what she does.
Hmm.
And that's unfortunate. And I think sometimes people don't look at it that way. I think,
Yeah.
and I mean, I think people would argue that she didn't with Xander because he was like, oh, he really liked it, or who wouldn't want that, but honestly, I think it's kind of a gray area because she just kind of like was like, I'm just gonna do this and, you know, take what I want. Um,
It
but with
certainly feels like he gets caught up and pulled along, whether that, like you said, it is definitely a gray area.
yeah. Um, but with Riley, I think it absolutely is. I think it
Yeah.
absolutely is. I don't think there's a question about it because he doesn't know what's going on. He doesn't, you know, and I get why Buffy is upset by the situation. I also don't think that it's her reaction though is a little off, I think, where she's like, what the idea that she doesn't see Riley as a victim in in that
She
case.
sees it more like as if he cheated,
Right. It's more of a
that rather than
portrayal
he is, yes,
than
right,
he's a
rather than
victim.
he's a victim. And
Yeah.
she, in some ways, I think she knows she's wrong, but I don't think she knows why she's wrong, because
Right.
I think that's where she fights against it. Like she doesn't want to be mad at him because she knows it's not his fault, but at the same time she is. But you're right,
Hmm.
because I think she sees it, like we said, as a betrayal, not that Riley was victimized as much as she was by
Right.
Faith.
Right. And so if you took that idea, even if you take the body swap out or whatever, if Faith came in and like just, it would be I mean, it would just be a very different story if Faith came in and just,
If she like dressed as much as she could to look like Buffy with a wig and then drugged Riley so he
right,
thought he was having sex with Buffy. That's
right,
sort of like the closest you could probably get into to it in our world.
Right. That very soap opera
Yeah.
trope of like, oh my God, I didn't know. Um,
Yeah.
you know, and yeah, but if you were not, and that also goes to say, I mean, I think we say, you know, there is sort of the equate of magic equaling drugs in their world. And
Yeah.
so, I think you're right. I think that's a great example of like that's the sort of real world equivalent is she single white femaled her
Right.
and drugged him
Yep.
and had sex with him. And he didn't know. And that's
Yep.
not,
He couldn't give
he
consent.
couldn't give consent because he didn't know who was driving. So um
And then
yeah,
even though, Riley's her boyfriend and she's been having sex with him, Buffy didn't consent to that moment because she wasn't in control of her own body.
right. So there is, plenty of
And I think so that's part of the problem is that the show doesn't see that as a type of rape and
mhm,
doesn't discuss it. To me, that's where the failings of rape culture comes in because it's
right,
just, oh, Faith did this horrible but yet wacky thing. And then
right,
it's also about like Faith again, because she
mhm,
gets that moment of Riley being like loving and
mhm,
she flips out. And I understand that Faith has her own trauma that's never dealt with and
mhm,
where it's coming from, but that doesn't mitigate the fact of what she did.
right,
And yet the show really is almost coming at it more from her perspective verse, which is fine, but in the aftermath, there should have been more about how this is a kind of rape.
right. And they sort of just, and they even brushed the whole thing off. They sort of,
Yeah.
it's only talked about one episode after, really, and they are just like, oh, okay, and then we're done.
Well, then it's about like magical Jonathan in Superstar
Right.
telling, like, having a conversation with Buffy and getting them back together. Now you're like, this feels really wrong. Even back then, it felt wrong.
It feels
It
very
felt like,
forced.
yeah, like we need to have some more conversation before we move forward again in this relationship because something really horrifying and traumatic has just happened. That
Right.
is completely like, out of our control.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. I think they just kind of brush it off. It's like, oh, well, that happened. Get over it.
Yeah, exactly.
We need to tell the next story.
Yeah, exactly. We got to get to the big bad of the season.
Right. Ugh. There's just so many examples of these things happening and, great and small.
Yeah.
And just talking about that, just kept like the pack just came into my head in that whole moment with Xander.
Yeah.
Um,
There's another moment that probably could get a little bit more discussion.
yeah, that they sort of brush over the fact. And I think the idea that he says, well, I don't remember anything that happened,
Yeah.
you know, when we know for a fact that when those spells happen, people remember like every other time
Yeah.
people have remembered what
Yeah.
happened except in the moment where Xander assaults Buffy
Right.
and he conveniently forgets.
Yeah. And the thing with that storyline too is you have the sexual assault attempt, which is its own problem and, you know, incident to discuss. But then the bigger piece is what does it say about Xander as well? And like what's underlying Xander? And I think that goes back to we were talking in the first part, in our previous episode, misogyny and that sense of there's that type of man, we were discussing like Warren in the incel culture that has that entitlement. Like,
Hmm.
I want this woman. She should do what I want. She should come to me. I think that was very much coming out as Xander was possessed.
Right,
And it just gets tempered more throughout the show, but we see peaks of it, glimpses of it,
right.
particularly throughout those high school years.
And I think, I mean, the argument is made that it's because of the predator inside of him, and so
Right.
it's not really him. There's also sort of the counter scene of that and Bewitched, Bothered, and Bewildered when Buffy comes to him in the trench coat and then nothing underneath, and she starts to take it off, and he's like, "You have no idea how much this actually would mean to me if you really wanted this, but I know that you don't. So I can't. And she remembers that. And, he gets points for that.
Yeah, I think to me what it says, it's not that we should like be put Xander down and say he's worthless and
Right.
he's as we said in the previous episode, he's a complex character.
Hmm.
Some of it serves a purpose, some of it feels again gratuitous.
Right.
But I think what this shows is if Xander didn't have a bit of the moral center that he doesn't have the people in his life,
Hmm.
he could go in that direction. I mean, I
Yeah.
think we said that in the last episode. He very much could turn into a Warren
Yeah.
on the wrong path.
Right.
Um, and that's what that shows.
Agreed. Agreed. Are there others? We listed so many. I don't think we have
Yeah,
time to go through
yeah,
all of
definitely
them.
go through all of them. No, I think those are the most significant ones. Maybe the other most significant one would be what Giles does to Buffy and Helpless with
I
the
would,
test.
yeah, that's pretty significant.
Hmm.
Um, I think that's a pretty key point for sure in their development. I mean, I think it goes into her ability to trust
Yeah,
people. I mean, that's yeah, it's a huge violation of her body, of her mind.
especially for a young woman who has been betrayed by her father,
Hmm.
has been abandoned, has been betrayed by her first love and lover in ways beyond even just a normal bad boyfriend. And then now you have Giles doing this to her,
Hmm.
and following the orders of an incredibly patriarchal organization
Right.
that sees the Slayer only as a tool. And even though it's not said, I know there's, a lot of fans interpret the test as either really a way to clean house of either weak Slayers
Hmm.
or problematic Slayers.
Yeah.
It's not stated, but I think that's a great interpretation of the test.
Oh,
And
for
Buffy's
sure.
obviously to the council a problematic Slayer.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. Because for them it doesn't matter if she lives or dies.
Right.
Because they'll just be another one.
Well, and they already have Faith, which they would probably then do something to her to get rid of her.
Right.
So they could have a more
Which is interesting though, because
controllable Slayer
the test happens
on your 18th
on
birthday.
her 18th birthday. So that's season 3. So
Hmm.
so they have Faith. So why doesn't Faith get put through that test?
Well, see, that is a really good question because within the show itself, they never are clear about how old Faith is.
Right.
The only time is in one of the Slayer dreams, she says, "Big sis," like you're trying to fill big sis's sister's shoes,
Hmm.
which doesn't necessarily literally mean Faith's older. I mean, you could take it that way. If
Right.
she is, I don't think it's a huge difference. But then if she was, she would have already been through this test, wouldn't she?
Perhaps. I mean, because
Or
she had watchers before. She had a watcher
right,
before and her watcher
right,
died. So,
right.
or if you're called because there's no telling when you will get called. And so if it happens after you're 18, does it do you still have to do the test?
That's a good point. If she was called when she was called, she was already past 18, or she
Right.
was 18 but already past her 18th birthday.
Right.
That's a really good point. I mean, that's where we've said, or I've said before, not having the concrete world building
Hmm.
leaves you with all these questions
Right. There's a
because
lot of
that's not
holes.
those details to them didn't matter to Joss Whedon. Like I said, he was more about what's the emotional arc, what's the
Hmm.
emotional journey. And for the most part, that's fine. But I do think this is where those weaknesses show up.
Right. Right.
But then it also leaves us with a lot more to talk about because it's
This is true. Like, why didn't this happen? Or what
yeah,
would have happened
nothing is set
if?
in stone. So we can be like, here's my interpretation.
This is what's going on.
Yeah.
Uh,
But, I mean, so yeah, I would say that was probably a pretty big betrayal of Giles to Buffy.
yeah.
Um, that certainly impacted their relationship. And it happens during a season where they're trying to recover from what Angelus did, and then the fact that she kept Angel being back
Mm-hmm.
hidden from him. But in the same time, because he does step up in the end and he gets fired, but he still stays around, unlike, her father,
Right.
I think that does a lot to repair the relationship and goes a long way to rebuilding that trust.
Right. Right. Um,
I think it helps Giles too to break his council patriarchy mentality as well.
yeah, it allows him to grow
Yeah.
and not just be a a suit, as it were.
Yes.
You know.
Which ironically that was a great example of using the wardrobe in the show where he transitions out of the tweed suits and becomes a little more casual, and then you have
Right.
Wesley coming in his little
In his little suits, he's
um
oh, Wesley.
I know.
Wesley Wyndham Price. Um, which is
He's
funny
a
because
he's a discussion for another day.
he is. And it is funny because it's interesting of all the times that there are issues with the disparagement and age, like the age differences between people. It's funny that specifically when Wesley wants to date Cordelia,
Hmm.
Giles is like, "Oh, go talk to her. She's 18. It's fine. You can go talk to her." And they make like it's a very pointed statement that she
Yeah.
is 18 and that he has like it is legally okay. But I guess because everyone else is a demon or a vampire or whatever, that there is no age of consent because they live forever, and so it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I
As
mean,
I
to me
guess is the point that they're trying to make or whatever. It's
that's another example of like playing it for humor, and you're like, yeah, it's funny, but then you think about it and you're like, it's not funny. It's funny
and
because the actors do a funny job with it,
right,
but Giles should not have told. Well, yeah, Giles shouldn't have told Wesley to go, and it's go dance with her. It is inappropriate, even if she is 18. But again, that's also like problematic where you don't know how old Wesley is.
right,
Do you base it off the actor's real age? Because then the gap I think becomes bigger. But
right,
if he's like supposed to be just out of the Watchers Academy in like 26, him having a dance with her at the school dance is it's not the end of the world.
right.
But again, that lack of information changes the context of the
Hmm.
situation.
Right. If he's in his 30s, it's like even him dancing with her is not
Yeah,
okay.
is no.
But if he's in his like 20s, his like mid to late 20s, it's like,
Yeah.
it's just
Well, the
questionable.
the other side of it is the fact that the actress herself is so much older than her character.
Right,
I
sure.
think that's the other side of it too. Like she actually is not that age. She does not look that age, especially probably by the third season. So
Hmm.
that plays into it too. That confusion of how should I interpret this whole situation.
Right.
But overall, I would say not a good call, Giles.
Yeah. Not, yeah.
So, well, so we've come to the end of this discussion and we've come to the end of our season. So we want to just do a quick little wrap up on the season and go back to our original discussion question, which is Buffy a feminist show, Charles?
Is it?
I feel
I,
like within the context of what is feminism and what feminism has attempted to do over the various um phases and over the years and as it changes, I would say no. I would say it has moments of empowerment. I think there does do some really great female storytelling, and even male storytelling within a female show.
mhm.
But overall, no, it is not a feminist show because
Yeah.
there, particularly in these last two discussions, especially the rape culture discussion,
Hmm.
it is perpetuated throughout that show too much to me to be a feminist show.
Yeah. I don't think it is. I would agree with that. I definitely don't think it is. There are too many things that it misses the mark on
Yeah.
to qualify, and it doesn't, and it certainly is empowering. I think that's a good word to use. I think it empowers, but it is not a feminist show.
Yeah. And I think you can have messy, complicated characters and a messy,
Mhm.
complicated show and still be aiming to be a feminist show. This is just a messy, complicated show with messy, complicated characters that doesn't also have the other part.
Right.
For many of the reasons we've discussed in the last few episodes.
Right. So and it's interesting because we and I think that question is important because particularly because Joss Whedon has always said, well, I'm a feminist and I'm a feminist,
Yeah.
you know, and I was raised by a feminist and all of that stuff, and has sort of touted that and carried that with him. So I think it's, you know, asking that question overall is sort of an important question to ask. Did it fulfill the
Well, and I
promise?
think too, even if you argued for the show itself being a feminist show, I think you still have to say no when you understand the stories being told by women and men who worked on the show that did not have positive experiences with Joss Whedon.
Right.
And there was a toxic environment and a toxic leadership and toxic relationships. To me, a truly feminist show is from the ground up. It's not just what you see on screen. It's everything happening behind the scenes.
Right.
It's trying to change the structure of how TV shows are made, giving women and other minority voices more opportunities. And it just didn't happen on that show.
Yeah. From casting on to,
Yeah.
you know, to the stories that were told. So
Yeah.
agreed.
So, I mean, the show still has value. We can still learn from it. I think you learn from mistakes as much as you do success.
Yeah.
So it doesn't mean the show needs to go away. It just means that we have to understand the context and understand all the aspects of it.
And to say, and this coming from two people who love the show and have been watching the show for like the past 25 years.
Yes.
Like, and will continue to watch it.
Yeah. And as we all grow and evolve as our culture and society, and we personally grow and evolve, our opinions will probably change again. I know my opinion of the show has certainly changed from watching it, you know, when I was 20 years old. I had a different understanding of myself and a different understanding of the world back then.
And I think that's what makes it such a good show, because I think it holds up in the way that it allows us to reflect on who we are based on the point in time in which that show was made.
Yeah, that's a great point.
We get to sort of reevaluate ourselves and what's going on based on this show, because it gives you so many great examples of good storytelling, of bad storytelling, of good production, of bad production, of, you know, funny, endearing, heartwarming moments, of really great, interesting, you know, plot lines, some really great fashion, some really awful fashion. It allows you to sort of look at all of it, and it just in an entertaining way, but you can still, even though you're being entertained, you can still learn.
Absolutely. Well, thank you everyone for joining us for our first season. We hope you enjoyed it. We definitely, again, want to hear what you think of both this episode and the season as a whole. If you have any suggestions or thoughts for a future season's big bad theme, we would definitely love to hear that. You can hit us up on Instagram and Facebook at A Buffy Podcast, or you can email us, for those of you that still email, at buffypodcast@gmail.com.
So thank you all again. It's been an amazing season. Kate, thank you for putting this to, you know, for suggesting that we do this and making this a thing for us, because I've thoroughly enjoyed it.
Taking this journey with me. I think it's been a great first season.
Yeah, it's been so much fun, and I look forward to doing more of these and seeing what other fun things that we can talk about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all so much. We look forward. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Share it with a friend. Share it with another Buffy fan, because that's how we grow as a family. And if anybody that you know watches Buffy and if you're hearing this, please share this with them, because we love to keep the conversation going, and we love hearing other people's thoughts and opinions on the show.
Absolutely. Take care.
All right. Bye.
Bye.